It's so beautiful.
I want to go camping. I feel like late in the summer, maybe.
Yeah, when it's not scorching hot. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And there's like tent rentals and stuff that we can do too.
Maybe that could be another podcast episode is how to go camping on your own.
Honestly,
you don't know what you're doing.
How to do activities and give yourself hobbies.
Yeah.
Outside of just going out. I would like to welcome on kickball superstar extraordinaire, new Southie resident, tiny bear owner, Emily Wright.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I can't believe it's been, I feel like I've known you longer, but we just met actually when I was like in the middle of this home buying process.
Right? My birthday was right when you moved.
I know, it's crazy. It's already been a year. Yeah, thanks for having me. I feel like I should preface with, I'm not a licensed realtor. So, there are obviously people that dedicated their whole careers to this. So I understand like a small fraction of what there is to know about real estate, but I'm really excited to talk to you and kind of just share what my experience was. I did buy a home on my own for the first time last year. And so some of this may be a little bit anecdotal, but hopefully it kind of gives you a good understanding of what the general process is like.
I mean, I feel like having a licensed realtor, it would be way too formal. And I feel like having somebody who recently just bought is a lot more applicable because people like you and me don't have much experience in understanding what everything is or what anything is. So I think it's better that it's anecdotal, honestly, just because it allows for people to resonate better with it, as opposed to coming in with any sort of understanding of what interest rates are, or mortgage loans are, any of that.
Yeah, honestly, I was fortunate enough to have an older sister she and her now husband had bought a condo a few years ago, and then they ended up selling it right before I started looking. So she's always kind of like the guinea pig for big life events like that. So it was really nice having the two of them kind of as like a sounding board and having someone that went through it recently. But then, obviously my parents, they bought our home 30 years ago, but they still had a lot of good advice from me. But a lot of it, I was pleasantly surprised to learn that you kind of just learn as you go. And it was I felt it was a pretty smooth process. Like if you have a really good team, so, finding a good realtor and just kind of going with the flow and being okay a little bit with the unknown and not being afraid to ask what might be a dumb question to someone else.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what my entire podcast is just asking people dumb questions for an hour.
That's the only way you learn. So
exactly. So I guess what we'll start off with is, how did you start the process? So you had to initially first decide that you were looking to buy instead of rent, right?
Yeah. And even that, I would say it was probably 5 years ago. I don't know. My lease was up and I was thinking about whether or not to renew. I had a roommate at the time and very loosely considered buying. I think it had just been a year since my sister and her husband bought that condo. So basically downloaded Zillow, just got a very general sense of what I could potentially afford and what, a 1-bedroom in the Boston area would even look like for my budget. I ended up going to one open house. And funny enough, I ended up seeing that same house on Zillow last year when I did this again 5 years later. So they were selling after a couple years. But yeah, I'd say from that point on, I had Zillow and I would probably go on and every now and then and just kind of generally understood what, the cost of a 1-bedroom home is in Boston, which I think was helpful just to have sort of that reference point. But last summer, so I was living with my sister at the time and our lease was coming up and we knew we weren't going to live together because she was going to grad school. And I was looking at 1-bedrooms in the same building and the rent, as I'm sure in Boston and most other places in the US was just astronomical. I don't know. I couldn't stomach, throwing that much money away on rent. But I also didn't want to live really outside the city or compromise on some of the, the things that I wanted in a living space. And so I had been in, the workforce for long enough that I had a decent amount saved up for, a down payment. And at the time, interest rates were really low last year. So just doing, and Zillow has great calculators to see based on the cost of the home and what you want to put down and what an average interest rate is, what your monthly payments would be. And in some cases they were less than what it would cost me to rent a 1-bedroom in Boston. So I was all right, if I'm going to be paying the same amount, at least when it's rent, you'll never see that money again. If it's going towards a mortgage, a good chunk of that you'll see when you go to rent it or sell it in the future. So that was sort of the what got me like seriously considering buying. And so, went back on Zillow. I ended up seeing like one of the first houses I clicked on. And again, the market was so hot last summer. So there was just like a lot of things popping up, and then, that fall off immediately and get sold. But I saw this one place that I really loved. And funny enough, it's actually my neighbor now. But that was the first house that I just like fell in love with. And I think because I was sort of in my mind thinking about what I could afford 5 years ago when I briefly looked, that now I was like, oh my God, like this looks so much nicer than what I knew or thought I could afford. And so I kind of fell in love with it. And I texted my older sister and brother-in-law, and they put me in touch with the realtor they had just used to sell their place. And so I gave her a text. The whole thing was really quick. We ended up going to see the place. I think just a couple days later, there was an open house. Fell in love with it, ended up putting in an offer literally on the first house that I saw, which everyone was like, that's crazy. Like, you literally just decided you wanted to buy a house last week and now you're putting an offer in. Like,
what's the norm? How many houses do people normally see?
I don't know. I think the process for me, so like end to end from when I decided I wanted to buy to when I ultimately got this home accepted was like under 2 months. I think I Googled it once and it was like maybe an average of like 4 months. I don't know. I mean, obviously it could be a lot longer. Like my older sister and her husband they were looking in the suburbs since the market was even crazier then. It took them like over a year to find a place. And a lot of people still have been looking since the pandemic and, haven't been able to find somewhere because they're just like crazy cash offers, well over asking. Sometimes people don't even go to look at the home in person or they're waiving inspections. It's, it's definitely been weird the last couple of years, but so I ended up putting an offer in on that house, and I loved it so much that I was willing to pay, the asking price, which my dad, when I talked to him, he was like, no, you always go in under, like you always want to negotiate, because he bought a, home 30 years ago and it was so different back then.
Right.
And now it was like, for the most part, like if you don't come in at asking, you're not even in the running. Like most people are going in over asking.
Wow.
Was looking. So, but what I really discovered that I loved about this realtor that, the only reason that I went with her was because it was what my sister had recommended. And I ended up loving her so much. I'm so glad I did. But she actually convinced me that the property was overvalued. And even though like I loved it, it was really great to have that like objective, person kind of reeling me in and being like, I know it might be in your budget and you love it, but like, you don't want to lose money on this if you go to sell it in 5 years and like you bought it overpriced.
Yeah,
so really
exactly. That's when that expertise comes in handy, because obviously, like you said, your dad bought a house 30 years ago and he suggested that. But like you said, times have changed. And so having a realtor that's seeing what the market's like right now helps, extremely helpful, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah. And I can't say enough good things about my realtor. Her name's Susan. She was absolutely amazing. And I think, a huge reason why the process went so smoothly for me. I could definitely see how it could be, I don't know, a lot more like a scary and confusing experience if you don't have a good realtor.
That's fair.
But yeah, I mean, definitely, really helpful. What was I going to say about that offer? Yeah, so that one I put it in, and then they ended up coming back. It was really weird. Like they asked for my best and final, I swear, like 2 or 3 times. I'm like, what is the point of a best and final? But every time they would come back, I'm like, okay, fine, I go up a little bit more. So we did a little bit of back and forth, and I ended up not getting it. So someone else, they went with another offer, and then probably looked at a few more houses all around Southie. I kind of knew the neighborhood that I wanted.
So wait, going back on when you put an offer in, is it anything like apartment where you have to put an application fee in? Like, are you paying money every time you put an offer in, or are you just like willy-nilly putting an offer in, and if they take it, congrats?
Yeah, good question. There's not necessarily like an application fee. Basically, you work with your realtor, and so they have like a templated, offer letter that they're, basically using for everyone. And you do usually put down a deposit of $1,000, and that will go towards the eventual down payment and closing costs, assuming you get the house. But that basically binds the offer that, like, if you back out, and there's a lot of legal stuff in the offer letter about like how and why you can back out and not lose the money. But that's basically what's binding you to not just be like, you know what, never mind, I changed my mind, I'm not interested anymore.
Right.
So yeah, so you do put in $1,000. You also put in like when you want the offer to expire. So I think for the most part, it's like 24 hours that then the seller gets to collect all the offers and decide, who to go with or negotiate. And then after 24 hours, it technically expires. But obviously, if you're still interested, you can renew it or whatever.
When you talk about your realtor and how she was so great, I think about my realtor that I had for my apartment, and she literally posted a video on Facebook about what our apartment looked like and was just showing what it was, essentially like an open house just on Facebook because it was COVID times. I would imagine that other realtors probably do the same thing. But then afterwards, that was the only real interaction, if you will, that we had with her besides for over email. And then we got charged a broker's fee. So like, what are realtors actually supposed to be doing?
Yeah, I think obviously like when you're renting a property versus buying, there's like so much more that goes into it when you're buying a property. So yeah, I mean, they're really like, almost think of them as like the project manager. Like there's so much going on behind the scenes that I still don't even know all of the details of what goes into all of this, but they're kind of the ones like orchestrating, when it actually comes down to like you submitting the offer and it being accepted and all of that, like kind of coordinating between the seller and their agent and then your mortgage lender or bank or whoever you're using and the attorney, and making sure that the whole process goes smoothly. And basically, if they're a good realtor, you kind of don't need to be aware of all of the nitty gritty that's going on.
Yeah, well, that's good.
But yeah, and then other than that, I mean, obviously, like I said, they're experts in their fields, they're licensed, so they have a much better understanding of the market, and definitely recommend getting one that, specializes in whatever neighborhood or area that you're looking to buy in. They'll have, more connections to see properties that might not be listed yet on Zillow. They're born negotiators, so they're kind of the ones, with the poker face and that are able to, hopefully get you the best deal. And they're really like, they're on your team. And so like, I loved mine. I think it's so important to pick someone not only that, is really capable and knowledgeable, but, someone that you trust and that you enjoy working with, and that, you can just be totally honest with, be like, hey, here's how much I can afford, but like, I really would prefer to be in this range, or, here are my concerns. Like they're the ones you can be totally open and honest with. And then they're going to go and like basically work their magic with the other, the seller's agent and try to get you the best deal possible. And I think it is really important to find, I think like all good realtors are looking at their relationship long-term. So they know that like a couple extra $1,000 in commission is not worth, like it's worth so much more if they get you a good deal and you love them. Cause like my sister, the only reason I went with Susan is because my sister recommended her. Right. So it's all about like relationships. And then like eventually if I want to, rent or sell this home, I'm going to use her again. So finding someone that really has your best interest is important.
And then how did your sister find Susan?
So I think she actually found her, I think through the Zillow app. Okay. I forget if she I feel like it's probably a good idea to like interview a few people. I did do that for the mortgage lender, but in part, I just really trusted my sister and brother-in-law. And then also like, I really wanted to put an offer on this first house that I saw. But yeah, I mean, it's probably a good idea, especially if you have time to like talk to a few people and just kind of feel out like, who do you like best? But I absolutely love who I went with.
Okay. So I interrupted you and you said that your offer was not accepted. And then what did you do?
Yeah, so that was the one that's now my neighbor, which is funny because I can like literally see what would have been my bedroom window from the living room. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I was like kind of crushed, but I think I knew when they came back to me a few times with my best and final, like I knew obviously there was another offer on the table. So was trying not to get too excited. Yeah, then I saw a few more places. This was a year ago now, so I'm trying to remember like how many I saw, maybe another like 5 or 10. And then funny enough, the second one that I put an offer in on was your next door neighbor. This is before I met you. But we would have literally been able to wave to each other from
No,
our
people
house.
actually just moved in.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's weird. I wonder if
think
they
that
were
doing like a lot of renovations before they moved in.
Oh my God. Well, that's funny because I'll tell you the story with that house. I wonder what the renovations were. But so yeah, so the next one I kind of fell in love with was your neighbor. And that one was interesting because that one was probably a better value than this first one. They're both 1 bedrooms, similar neighborhoods, both had, like a little deck and whatever, but it was listed probably like 10% lower. And I absolutely loved it. So that time, and I think this was sort of like their strategy with the listing price was like they listed it below value to like start a bidding war basically. So that one, my realtor suggested we actually come in over asking, whereas the first one she said come in under, it's not worth that much.
Oh.
So that's again why realtors are, they're great and
they know what they're doing.
Yeah, there's a reason, that they're, in the profession that they are. So so I took her advice. I came in over asking. Another thing I would recommend when you're going to open houses or just going to look at places, first of all, I mean, obviously like ask questions about like, you're looking for things that you would want in a rental property. Like, is there in-unit washer dryer? Is there a deck? Whatever's important to you. But then ask about like how old the appliances are, like when the AC or like heating system was put in. Like those are things that when they crap out as a renter, you call your landlord and it's on them to fix it. But obviously when you own, that's could be like tens of thousands of dollars to fix. So
right.
Asking things like that, which a lot of that they might even put on like the little pamphlet that they give you. But the other big one, try to find out as much as you can about the sellers. So I always like to ask them why they were selling, and you kind of get a feel for like, obviously if anything's like wrong with the property, they're probably not going to tell you that's the reason they're selling. But the more, it's kind of like a game of poker. So the more you find out about your opponent, the more kind of you have to work with. So with that one, I found out that they were like a young couple that were buying in the suburbs. They had actually already bought the house, or it was in escrow, and they were renovating it, and they didn't need the funds from this purchase to fund that, but that they basically like didn't usually as a seller you want like a quick closing. It's usually 30 days, but in this case they preferred to actually stay in their home longer because they're renovating the other one, and that worked to my advantage because my lease wasn't up until like mid-October, I think it was. So I was expecting to buy and like move in September and just have overlap, but knowing this information, I put that into my offer of like having a lease back deal where I would allow them to stay there and basically pay me in rent to live there for a month or two while they renovated. And that's what my realtor told me was like kind of the thing that pushed my offer over the edge, was just that they got, the comfort of not needing to like move twice.
Right.
And so they ended up accepting my offer. I was over the moon, like so excited. This was the second, offer I'd put in that got accepted. Started, kind of roughly planning what kind of furniture I want, just like envisioning my life there.
Right.
So what happens when you put in the offer is generally the purchase and sale agreement, which is drafted up by both your attorneys, is created within a week. And so that's just...
So wait, your attorney. So you have to hire an attorney in addition to your realtor?
Yeah. That's a good question. And so I got him from her. So my realtor basically had like recommendations for everything, for mortgage lenders, for attorneys. The person I chose for the inspection was recommended through her. And then I'll tell you about this later, but I ended up doing some little renovations to this place. And that was all again, like they have so many connections. So the attorney, and like, I didn't work a ton with him one-on-one. I mean, I had, a few phone calls with him, but for the most part, it's like, he's working with the seller's attorney and those two realtors and then the mortgage lender. And they're all just kind of like working behind the scenes, not so much with you. The offer was accepted. Oh, and so within that week of the purchase and sale being drafted up is when you would do the inspection. A lot of people were waiving inspections at the time. I personally would be way too scared to do that because you have no idea what they might find, and you might be in, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of whatever. So that wasn't something I was comfortable doing. So yeah, I got an inspector out there and highly recommend going with him or her on the inspection. So I took like half a day off from work to go do that because I would ask them tons of questions and like really like figure out what they're looking at, because you're paying him or her to go out there. I feel like it was like $500 or something like that.
Wow.
And that's money you don't get back if the deal falls through, like this one ended up doing.
So with your offer, you get the $1,000 back that you put in?
Yeah, so I got that back because I put in, so when, part of the offer, like you'll put in any contingencies. So, you know, if I was waiving the inspection, then I wouldn't have got 1,000 back, but since I wasn't, so I went in, and it's funny because when I had looked, and I had also brought my parents who, you know, had been through this before, and my dad's just like classic dad, like kind of just like knows everything about, I don't know,
infrastructure,
what to look for. Yeah. And so I don't know, nothing really stood out to us when we briefly looked at the basement on our own earlier, but when I went back with the inspector, he pointed out a couple things that were concerning. One of them being there were these like 2x4 like, you know, support beams that were at like a very slight angle, but they were definitely not, you know, plumb. And he was like, well, because of the color, like we know that these are put in the last, like, I don't know, 5 years or something. So like no one puts in structures at an angle, as I'm sure you all know. So like that means that there was like significant movement to the structure. And there were a couple of other little like things that he pointed out that kind of helped me understand in the future when I continued my search of like what are like red flags to look for in a basement. Cause I mean, basements in Southie are like, they're pretty grungy. Like you don't really know what you're looking at. You're like, oh, it's just like a crappy basement, like
dungeon. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, so that was really helpful. And I was really torn because I absolutely loved the place. I had like told some of my friends about it. Like I, you know, envisioned myself there, but I knew in my heart of hearts, like I couldn't like go through with it. Well, so I did try, I asked the seller if they would just let me get a structural engineer out there, which I actually called someone and was prepared to have someone come out like within a day or two to get a better understanding of like what this might cost to fix. And they were basically, I mean, it was such a seller's market. They were like, no, thanks. We're going to go with the next offer.
Right.
So that one fell through, and that was a little heartbreaking, but
yeah, I know. We've been neighbors.
I know. That would have been fun.
I mean, we still kind of are, but
yeah, I know, right? We're like
2 blocks away.
Southie, before I lived here, I was like, oh yeah, Southie's just like a neighborhood and it's kind of small, but it's like kind of spread out.
It's really spread out, yeah.
The west part.
I know.
But yeah, so that was a little devastating, but gotta, you know, try to keep your emotions out of it. So kept on with the search. I think then I was like on vacation. It was crazy. There were some houses I would see. I had like notifications on Zillow for if anything popped up in my budget with like my general criteria, and I would text my realtor and she would immediately text me back and like go to like schedule time to go see the house. There's one house that it was literally taken off the market like probably hours after it was put on, before the open house was even scheduled, because someone just swooped in offering all cash, like above asking.
Where are people getting this money?
I would love to know that. Yeah.
What?
So yeah, there was a lot of just kind of, I don't know, you get excited about something and then it might disappear. But fortunately it was the summer and I had like enough time kind of after work to go. I saw a lot of them just on my own if there were like an open house that I, you know, if I wasn't sure I really was serious about it. But yeah, it was kind of a whirlwind. The whole thing only lasted, like I said, under 2 months. So then the final house that the one that I'm in now, I saw that probably like, I don't know, in early August maybe. And this one so I was primarily looking at 1 bedrooms. This one was actually 2 bedrooms. And I was shocked like for the price that it was, because it's the exact neighborhood that I wanted. It had like the deck like I wanted and everything, but it didn't have central AC, and it had been rented probably for like 10 years. So just like cosmetics, like in the inside, like the paint and everything just like wasn't my style, but I like was able to just see through that and be like, this is stuff that I could, easily kind of just fix up on my own. And so, ended up putting in an offer on this one. There was no back and forth. Actually, for this one, instead of doing the 24-hour like expiration of the offer, I was in between this one and this other one that was over like more on the west side. And they both had the same like offer deadline.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't like put an offer in on two houses. It's like unethical and I don't know, probably illegal.
Right.
So I had to make a decision. And I was basically like, okay, can you guys get back to me in like 5 hours, which I think is like kind of unheard of, especially in the seller's market. But we gave it a try. And I almost wonder if part of like the urgency made them take me more seriously. I don't know.
Right.
But they ended up accepting this one. I had already done kind of a better assessment of like the basement based on what I knew from the other one. So I felt pretty good about, I should have had this
come in and look at the structure.
Yeah. So the inspection ended up going really well. And I don't know, it's just an exciting kind of really fast moving process, but surprisingly like smooth again, I think, because if you have a good team, it'll
make it so that it's seamless. Yeah.
It does.
So I guess my question is, before you even got to the process of, okay, I'm going to stop renting and start buying, you said that you had been looking at apartments in your apartment building in Seaport, which God knows that that's probably the most expensive city or the most expensive neighborhood in Boston to live in. So within that time, it's not like you saved money to buy a house in 2 months. How did you even begin to start saving?
I'd say like, I'm not one to live on like a super strict budget, right? Like there are some people that have a whole, Excel file of like everything that comes in and out of their account and kind of budget things down to, super granular level of detail. I never did that, but I think it helped that I loosely started the process like 5 years earlier, because that just gave me I think before that point, I probably had no idea really what like a home costs, or I probably knew like in the suburbs that I grew up in, just because you'd see for sale signs every now and then or whatever. But I don't think I really understood like what a 1-bedroom or, like a modest kind of 1-person condo or house would be in the city. And so I think just like getting your bearings, and even if it's just like downloading Zillow and just like looking around, or like going to an open house because they're free and open to the public. So like you could just walk in and just kind of start to learn, what the process is like. But yeah, I would say like having that in the back of my mind, I just kind of like over the years was saving a lot of my money. I don't know, made some investments, but probably, if you talk to a financial advisor, they might tell you other things to do with your money, but I ended up with like a good chunk of change. We also were in the pandemic for like a year. So a lot of things were shut down. I wasn't traveling. I had, gotten promoted a few times, gotten a few bonuses. So I feel like the first couple of years you're in the workforce, it's kind of like you're just on the grind and you're really trying to learn as much as you can and really, build your resume and try to, climb your way up. And then I'd say maybe after like 5 or so years, you kind of start to really establish yourself. And I feel like you might be surprised at how quickly you can jump from, one bracket to the next kind of, or I don't know.
So would you say there was like a certain percentage of your paycheck or certain money that you were allocating into a savings account? Like, where were you putting that percentage?
I think I just tend to be kind of more conservative with my money. So like I almost started in the reverse, where it's like, okay, I know I want to like max out my 401k or, do the company match. I had a Roth IRA. Definitely recommend that, especially there'll be a point when like, you might make more money and not be able to contribute to that. So definitely max out, big on retirement funds. Just try to like keep, I don't know. It's like, it's very tempting when you get a new promotion or a bonus to go spend it on a fancy vacation or upgrade, your living to the next.
I don't have that resignation. I don't feel the pull to do that. I'm like, okay, money, I'm just going to put that in my bank account and never touch it ever.
Yeah. So honestly, I feel like that I wish I had like a better like advice to be like, oh, just do this and you'll end up, saving up. Obviously everyone's financial, situations and obligations are different. So I feel like it's probably just honestly best to like talk to a financial advisor or planner, or even it's like a friend or family in that space, and they can kind of advise you on like based on your goals and I don't know, whatever debt you may have, like here's kind of what you should be working towards. And I feel like just the sooner you start that process, because again, they'll be different for everyone. Even if you can't, save the exact amount that you planned on, you're going to be better off than you are if you're just like wake up one day and you're like, oh shit, like I want to buy a house and I don't have any money. Like,
right. Exactly. I mean, that's kind of, so I have started doing what you mentioned of downloading Zillow and trying to see what things actually cost. And so obviously I reach out to my dad and I'm like, okay, these prices are insane. I don't even know where to begin looking. I don't understand this. And his response was literally 20%. 20%. That was it. That was all he said. 20%. I was like, okay, 20% of what? And he's like, your salary. And I'm like, okay, my gross salary, my tax, what are you talking about? And he's just like, yeah, it's 20%. I don't know what you don't get. And I was like, 20% of what? Like, I genuinely was not getting it. I was not grasping it. I was like, what are you talking about? I don't know how I can even begin to afford that. And then how do you break it down? And after all of that, like, how do you know? How do you know? It was such a strugglesome period. And I still I'm just trying to figure out everything and try and learn how to understand even.
Yes. And I feel like that's the big thing is like, there's no like set formula to like get to wherever you want to be in life. So it's just like the more, like the earlier you start learning about, if buying a home is, a goal of yours at some point in the future, like thinking about that now and just getting a good understanding of what, it would take. I mean, another thing that I think a lot of people don't talk about is that like 20% as a down payment is kind of like the golden standard, right? For buying a house. But I think you can put down like, in some cases, maybe 2%. Like you don't have to put down 20%.
Yeah. And there's some instances with first-time home buyers that you can get some sort of like exception to the 20% as well.
Yeah. And even without, I mean, yeah, I think there are a lot of like government like programs for first-time home buyers. And I think a lot of that might also just have to do with like your income bracket and all that. So like you have to qualify for it. But even outside of that, like you can put down less than 20%. You'll end up basically paying your mortgage, like you'll pay insurance on the mortgage, which basically just like is insurance for them if you default on your payment. So it's kind of like a little added interest rate in a sense. But I have like a lot of friends that went to grad school or got their PhD and they've, only been in the workforce for like a year or two making money. Granted, their salaries are way more than what I made coming out of college. So they have more that they can put towards their monthly payment, but not as much in savings. And so for someone like that, it might really make sense just to put down less money.
Right.
And you're making a ton of money. You can afford the higher interest rate and you can always refinance the loan in a few years. And, when you've had time.
So what does refinancing the loan even mean? Like reassessing how you're paying your mortgage?
Yeah. And I mean, I haven't done it obviously because I just bought a year ago, but it's basically like going through the same process. So like if your credit score has changed, if it's, hopefully it's improved over the last couple of years, you can then end up getting a lower rate. If the value of your property has gone up since then, that'll usually help you. So yeah, I mean, a lot of people will do that. I think a lot of people actually probably refinanced last year because the rates were so low that if they bought like 10 years earlier, it made sense for them to refinance just because, they get a much better interest rate now, even if their credit score didn't change. So that is something you can do. I mean, there's definitely a cost associated with it. I think it's like, I don't know, 2 or 5% of the loan. So like, it's not cheap. You don't be refinancing every year by any means, but if you just kind of like run the math, it definitely, can make sense for a lot of people.
Right. And then touching on credit scores, how much of a factor did a credit score play into your home buying process?
Yeah. The process of like so I worked with a mortgage lender and basically the first step, I had a conversation, that one I did shop around for. So I kind of interviewed, I guess, 3 people.
And also let's define what a mortgage lender even is. I'm assuming it's just someone who lends you money for your mortgage just based on its title alone.
Yes. How did you know? Yeah. So basically assuming, you're not one of those people that's able to buy a house in cash, you'll most likely either go through a mortgage lender or a bank for a loan. And again, I probably know a fraction of the subject, but as I understand it, a mortgage lender is basically working with you directly, and then they have relationships and access to a bunch of direct lenders, so basically other banks, and they're able to work with you with what your goals are to basically find you a loan that works the best for you. You end up paying more in fees to have that mortgage lender doing all that grunt work for you. You could go through a bank. I didn't do that. I went through a mortgage lender, and I think going through the bank, I've heard, can sometimes be a little bit harder to work with. And it's kind of like you'd basically then want to like talk to a bunch of different banks maybe to figure out like which one's the right one to go with. And so it's sort of like using a travel agency versus planning a trip on your own. Like you're gonna pay more, but you're hopefully gonna get better advice and like end up getting the trip that you wanted.
Right.
So for me,
it was analogy.
If I had to guess, I would say probably, I feel like most people I know went through a mortgage lender, but I mean, I'm not hating on banks. If you have I don't know, just I think it was again also because that's what my sister and brother-in-law, they had a contact they gave me, and since the first one went really quickly, I ended up using him for the pre-approval letter, which I don't know, did we talk about that with
No, we did not.
The offer? Okay, that's good, because that's something I didn't really know about before this. So when you put an offer in on a home, you almost always, for that offer to be entertained, they want to see a pre-approval letter from the lender. And so that's basically them saying like, yes, this person's good for the money. Like I'm most likely going to give them the loan. And
most likely.
Yeah. I mean, well, because there's so much then that goes into it. Like it's usually a 30-day closing. So there's so much like other stuff that goes into actually securing the mortgage, but it's like a good indication that like they've done their homework on you. So that's when they'll pull your credit score, which I don't know if people are familiar with what like a credit score is, but it's basically just used to determine like how likely you are going to be able to make your payments. And so it kind of is determined by, they want to see that you have a history of making payments on time. So things like credit cards, if you've had student loans or car loans, like they just basically want to see that you're able to borrow and pay back money in a timely way. They're also looking to see what your credit utilization is. So you typically want that to be low. I think I heard like around 30%. So that would be something like on, your limit on your credit card. If you get like a limit of like 10 grand and you only end up using $3,000 a month, you have a 30% utilization. So that's, I think, pretty good. So you typically want that to be higher.
And a little hack that one of my friends told me, who recently became a financial advisor, because I was like, okay, I need help like boosting my credit score. I just got a credit card. And he was like, well, what's your usage? And I was like, honestly, I'm like putting all of my expenses on my credit card. And he's like, just start paying it off every day. Because then your credit card utilization is going to go way down. Because if you're spending close to your max amount every month, then your credit's going to keep sinking and sinking. Whereas if you spend like you are spending close to your amount and you're able to just pay it off daily, and you'll never have to worry about getting close to that above 30% threshold.
And I've always been one that like, I don't know, I got a credit card, I think in high school, I don't know, 18 or something. And I mean, like co-signed probably with my parents, but yeah, it was my but they warned me, they were like, this, treat this like your debit card, like this is your money, like don't. So I feel like I just kind of was raised in that mindset of like, I'm not ever, to me, it was like my real money. I never
don't
really
spend money that you don't have.
Yeah. And I think I didn't even think about it as like, I'm literally borrowing money. I was just like, this is
like, I still don't think of it that way. Like
me too.
I use my credit card as a debit card. Like my dad has ingrained in my brain, do not spend money you do not have. Do not do it. You don't need to do it. Unless you're buying like a house or a car or something of that nature, you should never be spending money you do not have.
Yeah, I agree with that. Obviously, if, I don't know, some people living paycheck to paycheck or whatever, can be hard, but definitely, don't recommend having credit card debt. That definitely will hurt your score.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I don't know, they look at, any other outstanding debt you have. Oh, another thing, I don't think I knew this before that, but like you don't want your credit score being pulled, at least not a hard pull too many times. Cause if it's getting pulled a bunch,
What does it mean getting pulled?
Doing a hard credit check where they get your exact credit score.
Oh, okay.
Like running it through the system. I didn't know the difference between a hard check and a soft check, and I probably still can't explain it to you. Like,
but there is a difference.
But there is a difference. And yeah, if you get it pulled too many times, because when I was shopping for mortgage lenders, the first one obviously pulled it, and I used that for the pre-approval letter, which is due with the offer. And then the second one, I think, pulled it. And I just they're like, oh yeah, we're going to pull it. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, sure. Like, I didn't know. And then the third one was like, okay, no more having people pull this for you. Cause it could go down. I think it's only by a few points, but,
still,
I would recommend get your score pulled once by whoever the first person is you talk to. And then when you go to the next person, just say assuming my score is XYZ, can you give me a quote, and what would my rate be? And then just keep doing that for everyone else to compare the quotes.
Right.
And then have whoever the final person is, if it isn't the first one, obviously they'll pull it again. But that was something I learned. Another thing I learned was, so once I got the offer approved and we were, I don't know, I think we're a few weeks out from closing. I was getting prepared to, start buying. I had to buy a lot of new furniture for this place, including the couch, which lead times, I think they probably still are crazy, but especially were last year, months. So I wanted to purchase the couch, and I knew I wanted a new credit card to put, points on it. And so fortunately I asked my lender, I was like, hey, just double checking, it's cool if I open a new credit card, right? And she's like, no, don't open any new accounts or credit cards. Don't also make giant purchases out of the ordinary. Basically, you want to keep everything very steady state. Or else it could alert a flag. And I mean, this is what she was telling me.
Yeah.
Again, I don't really know how it all works, but she was basically it could just slow down the process for you. And you don't want to risk that. So just wait till everything's signed and done and then apply for the credit card. So that was something I learned, and some good advice. So I had to wait a little bit longer. I didn't have a couch till Christmas, but
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
That's crazy. If you were to go back and do anything differently, what would you do?
I don't think there's anything I would do differently. I don't really have any regrets. I think I really enjoyed the process, but maybe I'm weird. I think I've always had this
you are weird.
Love.
You are weird.
I mean, yeah, I know I'm weird, but I've always kind of had a little secret love for real estate. So I feel for me, it was I was always watching the HGTV shows, and I finally got to live it myself. But yeah, nothing really I regret. I feel everything worked out the way it was supposed to, because I absolutely love the home I'm in. And I feel it feels so much more like home than any place I've ever rented. And I feel you kind of have just this new sort of sense of pride for your living space when you buy it. And especially I did some renovations on it. So a little bit of my blood, sweat, and tears is in it. But I don't think there's anything I would do differently about the process. I mean, I always could have started earlier. I could have learned more about it, going into it. But I feel I was able to stay pretty organized. I definitely recommend getting a little Excel sheet out, and when you are shopping for mortgage lenders. Oh, this is another thing I learned about that whole process was for the most part, your interest rate isn't going to change a ton, because it's mostly based on your credit score and what's going on in the market at the time. But what you do have a little bit more negotiating power is in the closing costs. And so always ask for those to be itemized whenever you get a quote from, your mortgage lender, so that you compare them apples to apples, because some of them will lump certain things together, call them slightly different terms, and always, ask, what is this fee? It doesn't look like it's in English. What does that actually mean? And then once you have that together, just stay organized, so you can start plugging in okay, what if I put down a little bit less money, or what if I offered more or less on the house, or what if I bought some points? So you can buy points to basically get a better interest rate, but you're paying more money for that upfront.
Where do you buy points from your mortgage lender, from your realtor, from your bank?
Yeah, from the bank or the mortgage lender. So if they give you a rate of X, you could buy, I think usually you buy them in increments of a quarter of a percentage point. And so it costs, so again, if you're someone that has like a lot in your savings and maybe you make a little bit less, with your salary, that could be attractive to you if you have more money up front. But yeah, I would say just like there's going to be a ton of information coming at you, so try to stay organized, because also you're making huge decisions really quickly. So you have to like have confidence that you've done your research, you feel comfortable that like you've thought of everything that could potentially go wrong, and then be able to trust your gut and like make a decision and feel good about it.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I really think that you've given a lot of great advice on things to look out for and things to keep track of and people to keep in contact with. What was the hardest part of all of it? So, I mean, obviously it's not an easy or fun process, or maybe for you it was fun, but it wasn't an easy process. So what was like the hardest part of all of it?
Yeah, I guess the hardest part, I mean, like I said, I was a little heartbroken, especially by the second one, just because like it's hard. I mean, I feel like I'm a pretty like rational person where like I don't usually let my emotions like lead, I don't know, a lot of my decision making, but like you do end up getting like attached. And so
right, you romanticize a life that you look to have.
It's not like you're buying, I don't know, you're not buying like an outfit or something that you like, right. It's a big deal. So yeah, I would say just like try to just like be okay with things obviously like not working out the way you wanted them to the first time. Just know, I really believe like everything happens for a reason, not to sound corny, but like my sister and her husband, it took them like over a year, and now they're in their absolute dream home that like at some points during their process they were like, oh, like now I just wish that we had bought like a house we saw months ago, because you never know. I think that's the hardest part, is like you never know what's going to be on the market tomorrow,
right?
And you never know what the interest rates, like when you get quoted one day, like the interest rates could spike the next day and like your whole budget may change. And so there's so many variables outside of your control that you have to like be a little bit okay with like the unknown, and just like accepting that like things might not go the way you thought they would, but like just trust that like even if you don't end up buying for a few years, like just, I don't know, trust the process.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of what's most daunting to me, is that there is so much that's outside of your control. And me being kind of not necessarily a control freak, but likes to have things planned into a T and have everything very cookie cutter. The idea of having interest rates spike unexpectedly, or not have your offer accepted after following all the perfect procedure, and all of that is so incredibly anxiety ridden for me, because I romanticize things too, and I want things to go the way that I planned, and I want things to just follow a nice linear path, and I don't want there to be huge peaks and valleys. I just want it to be very stagnant, and I figure out the house I want to buy and buy it, and that's it.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
Obviously, that's not how that works.
Yeah. And I almost feel like in a weird way the ups and downs, like, I don't know, almost gave me a little adrenaline rush. And I was like, this is exciting and it's fun, but maybe again,
it's like dating again.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, buying a house is kind of like because my sister was like, I was so heartbroken over that house. I was even heartbroken over the very first one, and that one like, wasn't even accepted. But it's kind of like, she's like, you will love again. You will find a new home that you envision yourself in even more than this one. And so you just have to like, just not get too attached. And just moving on. Oh, speaking of how it's similar to dating, you can also get catfished by a house.
Oh my gosh, that is so funny you said that, because one of my friends from back in Ohio was reaching out to me about how she wants to buy an apartment or a house or condo or whatnot. And she was looking on Zillow to see about like houses in the neighborhood. And she finds this house and it's stunning, and it's $22,000. And she's like, what? And so she reads the description, and the description's like, my husband and I are property owners at a bunch of different locations around the states, and we love to provide opportunities and give back to first-time buyers. So if you're able to buy in cash, we do $22,000 home and no hidden fees, like just straight cash, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, that's so weird. And so she's like, either I'm going to show up at this house and I'm going to get mugged, or this is just a complete scam in general. And so she Googles like the text that was the description, and sure enough, it was a scam. But I can only imagine the number of new buyers that probably think that that's actually real and end up just forking
Like the
over.
house didn't exist, or like what was
the house existed and it was under the address and it was for sale, but that wasn't the listing for it. They just made it up.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a lot worse than what I was talking about, but that's like a true catfish. This was like, okay, you have outdated pictures, catfish.
Yeah. That's true. That's like an upsetting Hinge date is like, okay, I'm excited to see this guy. And then you see him and you're like, was that him?
You look a little different. Yeah. There was a wide lens, whatever. Or a lot of those where
the
it was like
cat or the fisheye lens.
Yes, that's it. The fisheye lens where the kitchen looked massive, and then you get there and it's like, what is this little shoebox? Like,
let me just scoot to the side here. Yeah. I think all of your insight and advice was definitely very helpful and gave me kind of a good starting point, I guess, to even begin to understand the buying process, because I don't know, eventually I would like to buy a house. Is it in my cards right now? Probably not, especially if I want to live in this city. I really appreciate you coming on, and I hope you had a good time.
I did. Yeah, this was lots of fun. Thanks for having me. I'll see you soon, neighbor.
Yeah, perfect, neighbor. Bye, Emily.
All right, bye.